The courtroom was packed. It was a usual day in the courtroom, with lawyers, clients, and people waiting to see justice unfold. But little did anyone know, this case was going to be anything but ordinary. It was about to become a spectacle that no one would forget for a long time. Pam Bondi, a former attorney general and a well-known political figure, walked into the courtroom with her usual confidence. She was used to handling difficult situations, and she was known for her sharp legal mind and ability to stand tall even when things got tough. But today, things were going to be different. Today, the courtroom was about to witness something that would leave everyone speechless. The moment Pam Bondi stepped into the courtroom, everyone in the room could sense that something was off. The usual calm atmosphere was replaced with an uneasy tension in the air. People could feel that today's case wasn't just another regular case. Something big was about to happen. As she sat at her table, facing the judge and the opposing counsel, her body language gave away nothing. Pam was known for her composure, for keeping her emotions in check no matter the situation. But what happened next was something no one saw coming. It all started when the judge, known for his sharp wit and quick comments, made a remark. The words left his mouth so casually that at first, people thought it was just a harmless comment. But those in the courtroom quickly realized that it wasn't harmless at all. In fact, it was a direct mockery aimed at Pam Bondi. And the shock on her face was the first hint that this case was not going to play out the way anyone had expected. At that moment, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. It was as if time slowed down. People in the gallery looked at each other, unsure of how to react. The judge's comment wasn't just a simple remark. It was something more, something personal. And it was aimed at Pam Bondi, a figure who had spent years building a reputation for being tough, unshakable, and always in control. But today, that control was tested. Pam Bondi didn't flinch. She didn't lose her cool. She sat there, her face expressionless, as if she was waiting for the next move. But the room was filled with curiosity. What would she do? How would she react to such a personal attack in front of everyone? The audience couldn't help but wonder. Would she lash out in anger, or would she remain calm and collected, as she always had before? The judge's words hung in the air, and all eyes were on Pam. No one had ever seen her like this before. She was always the one in charge, always the one who controlled the situation. But now, it seemed like she was losing her grip. The tension was palpable, and the room held its breath, waiting for her next move. As the seconds ticked by, the silence became unbearable. Would she stand up and fight back? Would she say something that would put the judge in his place? The court reporters, the audience, and even the lawyers in the room all waited for Pam to respond. But nothing came. She remained silent, almost as if she was waiting for the right moment to speak. The tension grew even more, and the audience couldn't help but feel that something huge was about to unfold. But then, in a split second, Pam Bondi did something no one expected. Instead of reacting with anger or frustration, she did something that shocked everyone in the room. It was a move that left the judge, the opposing lawyers, and the audience completely speechless. No one knew what to make of it. Some thought she had lost her mind, while others believed she had a plan all along. Whatever it was clear that Pam Bondi was not going to let this moment define her. The people in the courtroom couldn't help but wonder, was Pam Bondi really as unshakable as everyone thought? Was she going to fight back, or was this the beginning of her downfall? The judge had thrown a challenge her way, and now it was time for Pam to respond. The entire courtroom was on edge, waiting for her next move. Little did anyone know, this was just the beginning of a legal battle that would go down in history. Pam Bondi had been through tough situations before, but this time was different. The mocking comment from the judge had thrown her off balance, and the audience was eager to see what would happen next. Would she rise above the challenge, or would she crumble under the pressure? The next few moments would decide everything. As the seconds passed, people started to talk. Some whispered that Pam Bondi had lost her touch, that she wasn't the same confident, powerful figure she used to be. Others believed she was simply playing the long game, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike back. No matter what, one thing was clear. The judge had pushed Pam Bondi to the edge, and how she responded would determine her future in the courtroom. The tension in the room was so thick that you could almost cut it with a knife. Everyone in that courtroom was waiting to see what Pam Bondi would do next. And as the story unfolded, everyone knew this was just the beginning. What happened next would change everything. What was Pam Bondi's next move? Would she surprise everyone? Would she take the judge by storm? Or would this be the moment she finally showed her cracks? The mystery of what came next was enough to make everyone hold their breath. The courtroom was quiet, but the tension in the air was anything but. Pam Bondi had seen her fair share of challenges in her long career, but today, something felt different. Today wasn't like the other high-profile cases she'd been part of. There was an energy in the room, a buzz of anticipation that had nothing to do with the case at hand. It had everything to do with what had just happened, the judge's mocking comment. It was as if the courtroom itself had become a stage, and everyone was waiting for the next act. Pam Bondi, who had spent years building a career based on her tough, no-nonsense reputation, was suddenly caught in a moment where her usual composure was questioned. The people in the room were watching closely, eyes fixed on her, waiting to see how she would handle this unexpected twist. Would she fold under the pressure, or would she rise above and reclaim control? For those who didn't know Pam Bondi, she was a political powerhouse. Known for her role as Florida's Attorney General, Pam had fought high-stakes battles in the courtroom and in the public eye. She had faced powerful opponents and high-profile cases, and she'd always come out on top. Her reputation as a fierce attorney was well-earned, and no one had ever seen her back down from a challenge. But today, in this very courtroom, something felt off. There was a crack in her armor, a moment of vulnerability that even she couldn't hide. It wasn't just the judge's mocking words, it was how they seemed to hit her where it hurt. Everyone in the room could sense that this wasn't just a legal challenge for Pam. It was personal. The comment had struck a nerve, and no one knew what she was thinking. As Pam sat there, her expression neutral, her mind was racing. She was calculating her next move. She knew that this moment could either break her or solidify her position in this case. The people who doubted her strength, who questioned her power, were watching closely. This was her chance to prove them wrong. But how? What should she do next? For the first time in a long while, Pam felt the weight of being in the spotlight, not as the one in control, but as the one being scrutinized. It was almost as if she was standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down at the unknown. The stakes were high, and the pressure was mounting. In a room full of legal professionals, reporters, and onlookers, Pam Bondi needed to make her move. As the seconds stretched on, the judge, who had made the comment, continued to maintain his stern expression. He was unfazed, almost like he was daring Pam to react. There was a moment of silence, a heavy, suffocating silence, as everyone waited for the next chapter of this unexpected drama to unfold. Would she break her silence, or would she keep her composure? On the other side of the room, the opposing attorneys exchanged glances. They had been waiting for a moment like this. They knew the importance of exploiting any weakness in Pam's defense. If they could get her to react, to make a mistake, it would give them an advantage. They'd seen how confident she was in her past cases, but this was something new. This wasn't just a legal strategy. This was personal, and everyone in the room could feel it. But Pam Bondi wasn't one to give up so easily. She had faced tough situations before. She had been in high-pressure moments where everything was on the line, and she had always come through. This moment, this mocking comment, would not be the one to defeat her. Not today. But how would she respond? Everyone in the room wondered. Would she stay silent, take the high road, and show the world that she was above the petty comments of a judge? Or would she take the bait, fight back with fire, and risk losing control of the situation? Either way, the people watching could feel that this moment was going to define the rest of the case. Pam took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. She had faced moments like this in her career, moments when people underestimated her, moments when they tried to push her to the edge. But Pam Bondi wasn't the type to back down. She had learned long ago that staying composed and calm in the face of adversity was often the best strategy. The judge, perhaps sensing the growing tension, glanced over at Pam, waiting for her to make a move. His eyes held a certain challenge, almost daring her to react, to show some sign of weakness. But Pam didn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, she remained perfectly still, as if waiting for the right moment to strike. At that moment, the atmosphere in the courtroom became electric. The people in the gallery leaned forward in their seats, eager to see what would happen next. The reporters, who had been typing away on their laptops, stopped and looked up, waiting for the drama to unfold. Pam's next move would be the key to everything. Would she crumble under the pressure? Would she give in to the judge's taunt? Or would she turn the tables, showing everyone that she was still in control, that no one could break her? The crowd was waiting for an answer, and they would get it soon enough. As Pam Bondi sat in her seat, her mind raced. She knew this moment would be talked about for years to come, and whatever happened next, she had to make sure it was a move that would silence her critics once and for all. The courtroom was on edge. The world was watching, and Pam was ready for whatever came next. The judge's words echoed in the courtroom, leaving a trail of silence behind them. People shifted in their seats, uncertain of what they had just heard. It wasn't just a casual remark. It felt pointed, deliberate, almost designed to make Pam Bondi feel small in front of the entire room. For a moment, it seemed like time stood still. The usual flow of courtroom conversations, the rustle of papers, the sound of murmurs between lawyers, everything stopped. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for Pam to react. Pam Bondi, sitting at her table, had a mask of composure on her face. But the truth was, no one had ever seen her look quite like this. The harshness of the judge's mockery seemed to pierce through the armor she had carefully built around herself over the years. It wasn't just about her career or her reputation, but about something deeper, something more personal. The comment wasn't just aimed at her legal skills or her arguments in the case. It felt as though the judge was mocking her very presence. A smile, cold and calculating, curled on the judge's lips as he looked down at Pam. His words were sharp, and everyone in the room could sense the thinly veiled mockery. Pam, who had always maintained a confident, strong appearance, could feel her stomach tighten. It was a rare moment of vulnerability. How could the judge, someone she respected, make such a move in the middle of the trial? It wasn't like him to play games. He was known for his strict professionalism. Yet here he was, poking fun at her in front of the entire courtroom. Her first instinct was to stand up, to call out the judge, to show everyone that she wasn't going to be a victim of his words. But something stopped her. A quiet, composed voice inside her told her to wait. She wasn't the type to let emotions control her. She had always been calculated, careful, strategic. Reacting in the heat of the moment wouldn't work in her favor, so she stayed silent. The courtroom, however, wasn't. A ripple of whispers moved across the room. The opposing attorneys exchanged looks, wondering how she would respond. Some of the observers looked uncomfortable, sensing the tension, while others couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. It was clear this was the moment when everything could change. The judge, seemingly satisfied with his jab, went on with the proceedings, but Pam was no longer listening. Her mind was racing. She had to think fast. How could she regain control of the situation without letting the judge get the upper hand? This was a test, not just of her legal skills, but of her ability to handle pressure, to show everyone that even when she was pushed to the edge, she wouldn't back down. Minutes felt like hours. Pam's eyes flicked to the side, catching the gaze of her team, who sat across from her. They were waiting for her to make the call, to tell them how to proceed, to lead them out of the storm. But she didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. In that silence, she was making a statement. Suddenly, Pam stood up. The movement was so unexpected, so sharp, that the entire room seemed to pause again, as if time had stopped just for a moment. The courtroom went still as everyone turned their attention to her. Was she going to speak? Would she finally address the judge's insult? Pam, with the air of someone who was in complete control, adjusted her suit jacket and slowly walked toward the center of the room. All eyes were on her. The judge looked up, perhaps surprised by her calm response, but he didn't say anything. He simply waited. The silence that followed felt heavy, each second stretching into eternity. Pam's voice, when it finally came, was quiet but steady. "Your Honor," she said, her tone even and composed. "I would like to remind you that this court is a place of respect. I trust that we can keep the proceedings focused on the matters at hand, without any unnecessary remarks." Her words were simple, yet they carried weight. She wasn't raising her voice, but the authority in her tone couldn't be ignored. She wasn't being aggressive. She wasn't throwing insults back at the judge. She was calmly asserting her position, reminding everyone, most importantly, the judge, that the courtroom was a place of professionalism. The room remained silent for a beat, and then, slowly, the judge nodded. The smirk on his face faded, replaced by the cold, neutral expression that everyone knew him for. It was as though Pam had taken control of the room in one swift move. In that moment, the judge realized he couldn't push her too far, not without consequences. The opposing attorneys, who had been eagerly awaiting Pam's reaction, looked at each other. They were no longer sure what to expect. Pam had done something unexpected. She hadn't lashed out in anger. She hadn't allowed herself to be belittled. Instead, she had shown that she wasn't someone who would be knocked off balance easily. She had responded with grace, and that made her even more powerful in the eyes of everyone watching. As the judge moved on with the case, the courtroom slowly returned to its usual rhythm. But something had changed. The tension that had hung in the air moments ago was now replaced with a quiet respect for Pam Bondi. She had turned what could have been a humiliating moment into a powerful statement, reminding everyone of the strength and composure that had made her one of the most respected figures in the courtroom. But Pam knew that this was only the beginning. The judge might have backed off for now, but the real battle was just starting. The case itself was far from over. And Pam Bondi, despite the mockery, wasn't about to let anyone, judge or opponent, get in her way. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, but it was no longer a sense of discomfort. It was a strange mixture of surprise, admiration, and a hint of nervous anticipation. Pam Bondi had just stood up and calmly addressed the judge's mockery without raising her voice, without flinching, and without letting her composure slip for even a second. The courtroom, which had been on edge just moments before, now seemed to hold its breath in unison. The judge, who had once seemed so eager to undermine her, nodded and returned to the case, his earlier mocking comment forgotten, at least for the time being. But the reaction from the people in the room was far from forgotten. The opposing attorneys exchanged quick, nervous glances. They had expected Pam to snap, to lose her cool. They had hoped that the judge's jab would unsettle her enough to make a mistake. But what had happened instead was completely unexpected. She hadn't lost her composure. She hadn't even raised her voice. No, Pam Bondi had handled it with a kind of cold professionalism that was both shocking and admirable. They were now wondering if they had underestimated her. One of the junior lawyers from the opposing side shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had been ready to see Pam stumble, perhaps even get angry or defensive. But now he wasn't so sure. Pam had turned the tables, and the judge's mockery seemed to have backfired. It was clear that Pam wasn't someone who could be easily provoked. Her calm, composed response had not only shut down the judge's attempt to undermine her, but also sent a message to everyone in the courtroom. Pam Bondi was not someone to be taken lightly. The spectators in the gallery, who had been whispering to each other just moments before, now sat with rapt attention. Some were visibly impressed by the way Pam had handled the situation. Others looked at each other, wide-eyed, as if trying to process what had just happened. It was rare to see someone respond to such mockery with such grace, and it was a moment that they would remember for a long time. Among the spectators, there were a few who had followed Pam Bondi's career closely. They had seen her rise through the ranks, seen her win high-profile cases, and seen how she handled the pressure of being in the public eye. But this moment felt different. There was a sense that the game had changed. Pam had shown not only her legal skills, but also her ability to stay unshaken when everyone expected her to break. It was a side of her that hadn't been seen often, silent but powerful. At the same time, there were others who had always questioned Pam's strength. The judge, now back to his usual neutral self, cleared his throat and called the next witness to the stand. A middle-aged man, well-dressed in a dark suit, stood up from the opposing side. He walked toward the witness stand, exuding confidence. Pam's eyes locked onto him. This wasn't just another witness. This man had been carefully chosen to back up their case. His testimony could tip the scales, and Pam knew that she had to be ready. As the witness began his testimony, Pam's mind worked in overdrive. She knew the man's story inside and out. His words, the way he presented himself, everything had been thoroughly examined. Pam wasn't just going to let him testify without probing every weakness, every flaw in his statement. She had studied him for days, and she was ready to expose any inconsistencies. The man spoke about a series of events, detailing an incident that was central to the case. His words were smooth, but Pam noticed the smallest tremor in his voice. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. And it was enough for Pam to take notice. With a slow, deliberate motion, Pam rose to her feet. The room seemed to quiet instantly, as though everyone could sense that the real showdown was about to begin. She moved with purpose toward the center of the courtroom, her gaze never leaving the witness. "Mr. Thompson," Pam began, her voice calm and steady. "Earlier, you mentioned that on the night in question, you were at the bar, speaking with my client. Is that correct?" The witness nodded confidently. "Yes, that's correct." Pam continued, "You were speaking to my client about the very issue at the heart of this case, and you're sure your memory of the conversation is clear?" The witness hesitated for just a moment, a brief pause, but it was enough. Pam's eyes sharpened. The small crack in his composure was now noticeable. She pressed on. "Isn't it true, Mr. Thompson, that you were actually not at the bar when the conversation took place?" she asked, her tone unyielding. The room fell silent. The witness's face twitched, and the confidence he had earlier displayed seemed to vanish in an instant. His eyes darted briefly to the defense table, as though seeking support, but none came. Pam's eyes were locked on him. She had struck the first blow. "Your Honor," she said, turning toward the judge, "I would like to submit evidence showing that Mr. Thompson was not at the location he claims to have been. In fact, we have security footage that clearly shows him elsewhere." The judge, momentarily taken aback, nodded slowly. "Proceed, Ms. Bondi." Pam moved quickly, her legal team behind her, handing over the documents. The gallery, now fully engrossed in the proceedings, held its breath as Pam executed her strategy flawlessly. The witness was now exposed. He had lied on the stand, and Pam had caught him in his lie without flinching. It was a move that displayed not just her legal skills, but her ability to read people, to anticipate the next move. The witness stammered, trying to explain himself, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The audience in the courtroom began to murmur, whispers of disbelief spreading like wildfire. The opposing attorneys, who had once been so sure of their case, now had the burden of explaining their witness's credibility problem. Pam didn't let up. She continued to ask questions, each one chipping away at the foundation of the opposing case. She didn't shout, didn't make a dramatic show of it. She simply did what she did best. She exposed the truth with precision and calm. The judge, clearly impressed, glanced at the opposing counsel. It was clear that this turn of events was going to have a significant impact on the case. Pam Bondi had turned the tables. What had started as a potentially humiliating moment in the courtroom, with the judge mocking her, had now become a display of her undeniable legal brilliance. And the courtroom knew it. As the witness finally conceded, his credibility shattered. Pam turned back to her table. Her expression remained neutral, but inside, she felt the satisfaction of knowing that she had just delivered a decisive blow. The momentum was now firmly in her corner, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. Pam Bondi had just made a brilliant move, exposing the witness's lie and swinging the momentum in her favor. The courtroom was buzzing with murmurs as the opposing side scrambled to recover. The once confident witness, now thoroughly discredited, had slunk back to his seat, his credibility in tatters. Pam had done what she did best. She had shown her ability to think quickly and strike at the perfect moment. But despite the victory, Pam knew that this wasn't over. The opposing side wouldn't just fold, they would regroup, and they would fight back harder. This case had become personal, and the next move was going to be crucial. As the judge called for a short recess, Pam stood up and exchanged a few quick words with her legal team. They all knew the next phase of the case would be even more critical. The opposing attorneys were known for their ability to turn the tide when things looked bleak. But Pam wasn't worried. She had dealt with pressure before. She knew how to stay a step ahead. While Pam strategized with her team, the gallery was alive with conversation. Reporters whispered to each other, their fingers dancing across their keyboards as they prepared to write their stories. They had just witnessed something rare, a highly skilled attorney not only shutting down a witness's testimony, but doing so with unmatched poise and precision. It was a moment that would go down in courtroom history, but not everyone in the room was so quick to praise Pam's brilliance. On the other side, the opposing attorneys were already regrouping. They had taken a hit, but they weren't out yet. They had a few more cards to play. The courtroom wasn't just about presenting the best case, it was about perception, and they needed to shift the narrative quickly. As the recess ended, the courtroom slowly settled back into silence. The judge gave a nod, and the proceedings continued. It was now the turn of the defense to present their case, and Pam knew that this would be the moment where the true test of her strategy would unfold. The next witness, a woman in her mid-40s, stepped up to the stand. She looked nervous, glancing briefly at Pam before taking her seat. The defense had chosen her carefully. She was calm, collected, and had a story that could sway the case in their favor if she played it right. Pam's mind was already working, processing the facts she had on this woman. She had researched every detail about her, and Pam knew that she had to dig deep, ask the right questions, and expose any inconsistencies. The woman began her testimony, speaking in a soft voice about an incident that had occurred several months earlier. Her story was smooth, rehearsed even, but Pam could sense something off. The woman's eyes darted from side to side as she spoke, her responses slightly slower than expected. Pam noted every detail, every word, and every subtle movement. She could feel the tension building again. The moment came when Pam stood up to cross-examine. She approached the stand with confidence, her calm demeanor returning as if she had never left. She didn't rush into her questions. Instead, she waited, allowing the room to feel the weight of her presence. "Ms. Davis," Pam began, her voice calm but unwavering. "You've stated that you were present when the events we're discussing occurred, but I want to ask you about something specific. You claim that you saw my client at the scene, but you also mentioned that you didn't remember the exact time. Isn't that correct?" The woman hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. She tried to maintain her composure, but Pam's question had already planted a seed of doubt. "Yes, that's right," Ms. Davis replied, her voice wavering. Pam leaned in slightly, her eyes fixed on the witness. "And yet, we know from the phone records that you were not in the area at the time you claim to have seen my client. You were, in fact, somewhere else entirely. How do you explain that discrepancy?" There it was, the bombshell that could potentially unravel the defense's case. The courtroom was once again deathly quiet. The defense attorney, sitting nearby, had already begun to shuffle papers in an attempt to formulate a defense, but it was clear they hadn't expected Pam to strike so soon. Ms. Davis froze, her face drained of color, and her hands clenched tightly around the edges of the witness stand. The nervousness in her eyes betrayed her, and Pam knew she had her. "Your Honor," Pam said, turning to the judge, "I'd like to submit the phone records and location data from Ms. Davis's cell phone. They clearly show that she was not where she claims to have been at the time of the incident." The judge, now fully engaged, nodded. "Submit it, Ms. Bondi. Let's see the evidence." Pam turned back to the witness, who was now visibly shaking. The shift in the room was palpable. The defense's star witness had just been exposed as another liar, and Pam had done it with the same methodical precision that had defined her throughout the case. "Ms. Davis," Pam continued, her voice smooth and cold, "would you like to amend your statement now, or should we proceed with the truth?" The witness stammered, trying to come up with an answer, but her words were caught in her throat. There was no more room for excuses. Pam had cornered her in a way that no one had anticipated. The gallery, the reporters, the entire room could feel it. The power of Pam's strategy was undeniable. She had just destroyed the credibility of yet another key witness for the defense. The momentum had shifted once again, and now it was clear. Pam Bondi was in control of this case. As the judge called for another brief recess, Pam sat back in her chair, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction. But deep down, she knew that there was still much work to be done. The case was far from over, and the defense was not done fighting. But for now, Pam Bondi had once again proven why she was one of the most respected and feared attorneys in the courtroom. Her sharp mind and unwavering confidence had turned the case on its head, and the courtroom was waiting for her next move. As the courtroom reconvened, the atmosphere felt different, charged, electric, as if everyone knew they were witnessing the final act of an unforgettable drama. Pam Bondi had relentlessly dismantled the opposing side's case, piece by piece, until the defense seemed to have little left to stand on. The judge's earlier mockery felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by Pam's calculated brilliance and unwavering confidence. Yet, Pam knew better than anyone that the game wasn't over until the final ruling. The defense, despite their earlier mistakes, wasn't backing down. They had one last card to play, and everyone knew it. The defense attorney, a man with a reputation for being just as ruthless as Pam, stood up. He had been silent for most of the day, but now his expression was fierce. The clock was ticking, and it was clear that he was preparing for his final move. The stakes were as high as they could get. Pam watched him closely, sensing that this moment would either solidify her victory or open a small crack that could change everything. She leaned forward slightly in her chair, her mind running through every scenario, every possible move. She wasn't just fighting for the truth. She was fighting for her reputation, for the satisfaction of proving everyone wrong. The defense lawyer began his final summation, his words smooth and persuasive. He painted a picture of doubt, suggesting that Pam's evidence wasn't as solid as it seemed, that perhaps some of the witnesses weren't entirely discredited, and that her case had been built on shaky ground. He raised his voice, trying to sway the jury's emotions, to plant just a seed of doubt in their minds. But Pam wasn't rattled. She stood up, calm and collected, knowing that this was her moment to finish the job. As she walked to the front of the courtroom, every eye was on her. The silence in the room grew thick. She didn't rush. She simply stood there for a moment, letting the tension build, letting the weight of the case settle over everyone. And then, in a voice that cut through the silence, she began. "Your Honor," she said, turning to the judge, "this case has always been about the truth. The truth that we've now proven, not through emotion or rhetoric, but through hard, undeniable facts. The defense has attempted to cloud the issue with doubt, but what we've seen here today, what the jury has witnessed, is clear. They've seen how the defense's witnesses have faltered, how their case has unraveled under scrutiny. And they've seen how I've stayed focused on one thing, the truth. Pam's words weren't just a defense. They were a declaration of confidence, an assertion that no one could shake her control over the case. She turned to face the jury now, her eyes steady and direct. "You've seen how every attempt to twist the facts has failed. You've seen how I've exposed the lies one by one. This is not a case built on uncertainty or manipulation. This is a case built on facts that you cannot ignore." Her gaze swept over the jury, meeting each of their eyes. There was no question left. The defense had been defeated. The courtroom, which had been holding its breath, now felt as though it was exhaling collectively. The judge, his expression neutral, looked toward the defense one final time before nodding toward Pam. "Ms. Bondi, I believe we've seen enough. The jury will deliberate." Pam gave a small, satisfied nod, but inside, she knew that the battle was over. The rest was just a formality. As the jury filed out to deliberate, Pam sat back in her chair, finally allowing herself to relax. She had done it. The case was hers. The defense's last-ditch effort had failed. The truth had won, and in this high-stakes courtroom battle, Pam Bondi had once again proven why she was a force to be reckoned with.